that feeling of being controlled is actually emotional neglect, because when somebody is trying to impose all these rules and restrictions on you, it's basically them imposing their own worldview onto your experience and not giving you the space and not showing the interest in your own emotional experience to honor that you have a say in this, basically. So it's this emotional abandonment that happens to us when we're young, us love avoidance, that causes us to then fear more emotional abandonment. So it's really more so than a fear of commitment, it's a fear of truly being loved. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of ShiShi Meditations. And in this video, I want to talk about attachment theory. So I'm reading a book right now called The Truth by Neil Strauss. And it's basically about this guy who cheated on his girlfriend who he was like madly in love with. And he ends up going to rehab for sex addiction. And basically he goes on this like insane journey, like trying out all these different kinds of relationship paradigms, everything from being single to being monogamous to being in an open relationship to polyamory and all these different things. And one of the common themes in the book is this idea of attachment theory. And attachment theory, without getting too deep into it, the basics of it is that it's a psychological model that states that your relationship with your romantic partners will resemble and model, emotionally will resemble your relationship with your parent of the opposite sex. And basically they boil it down so that there's two main types of groups within attachment theory. So the first group is what they call love avoidance. And love avoidance are people who are essentially scared of commitment. And the other group is love addicts, people who latch on very quickly and are scared of abandonment and being alone. And basically what the theory states is that if you grew up with an opposite sex parent who smothered you with attention, whether positive or negative, just kind of like didn't give you enough of your own space to develop as your own independent, autonomous adult, and it kind of used you to vicariously resolve their own unresolved emotional issues. They used you as their child to sort of work out their own issues. Then you'll grow up to be a love avoidant because you experience what they call enmeshment when you're growing up. And enmeshment basically means that your parents didn't give you enough space to develop your own autonomous identity because they were kind of involving you in their own issues and their own emotional needs. And those emotional needs could range from, having a really strict mother or father who was extremely strict and hard on you about your performance in school, and kind of like made you feel as though your self-worth was totally wrapped up in how you did academically, because it might reflect on them or it might reflect on you. Another example would be if you had a mother who essentially used you to help her solve her own emotional problems, or if she wasn't very close with your dad and used you to sort of fill that void of intimacy emotionally. And it's actually kind of a fucked up like description that they use, but the term is like emotional incest, basically, because it's like she's using the mother or the father or whoever uses the child to satisfy the emotional needs that the spouse should be satisfying, but the spouse maybe is like distant or whatever. So that's one side of it. And then the other side of it is what they call love addicted people. And love addicted people are people who were essentially not given enough attention by their parents and always felt as though they needed to basically prove themselves to their parents. So love addicted people are people who maybe had a distant father or a distant mother or a parental figure who basically left them feeling neglected much of the time. And so they grew up with this idea that no matter what they do, it's not enough and that they're not truly worthy to love themselves. And so they end up latching on very quickly to people to try to basically pin that person down so that they can have a feeling of being filled with love. And I thought this theory is super interesting, and admittedly, I don't understand it perfectly well yet, so I'm like trying to explain it, but I'm still learning it. And I'm actually, the next book on my reading list is a book called Attached, and it's basically all about attachment theory. So if I like kind of explain something wrong, just forgive me. I'm sure this is not the first video that I'm going to make about this, but it got me thinking about my own life and my own romantic patterns. And like honestly, I've been very much a commitment phobe in my life. I've been super scared of settling down with people because for me, you know, I love my parents and I have a great relationship with them. But the fact of the matter is, like, they did raise me extremely strictly. In many ways, I was very sheltered. I wasn't, you know, allowed to necessarily do a ton of things. And I was really held to a high standard until I got to high school, and just like, I just got such bad grades that I think they kind of gave up. But like up until then, I was held to a very high standard in everything I did, academically, in sports, in music, playing violin, and all this stuff. And yeah, I just had like what you would call like an Asian tiger mom to a degree. And in many ways, I'm thankful because like I owe a lot of my work ethic and you know, drive to that. But in other ways, it did leave me feeling extremely like stifled and suffocated sometimes. Like, gosh, like I feel so enmeshed and controlled, and it gave me this extremely strong desire and value that I place on freedom as an adult. So now as an adult, anytime I get close with any girl, with any woman who starts to show me affection or starts to show me love or starts to show me care, I immediately back away and shut myself off of that possibility emotionally, because I don't want to be controlled by anybody again, the way that I felt controlled when I was a kid. And so this has caused me to seek freedom as my primary value in all of my relationships, which has obviously made it very difficult to settle down in a monogamous relationship, because, you know, that's something that you need to sacrifice to a degree, freedom, depending on how you set up a relationship. And this is why I'm also really interested in exploring other types of relationship models that maybe aren't monogamous. Is it possible to love somebody very much and not feel like you own their body, and feel like, you know, if you really feel like someone's your best friend, to be cool with them having fun, even if it's without you? Much easier said than done, because I also definitely have some jealous bones in my body. But it's just an idea that I've been exploring and playing around with, this idea of compersion, which is a word in the polyamorous community, which basically means like your lover's pleasure is your own pleasure, even if it's not with you, and that you'll feel happier for them regardless. So yeah, this is something that's been going around in my mind. And then the final point I want to make that I found super fascinating in this book is that, you know, if you grow up to be a love avoidant because for whatever reason you felt like you were over-controlled or over-enmeshed as a child, and you didn't have enough space to develop your own autonomous identity, and then that has resulted in you through your adolescent years and your adult years placing a very high premium on freedom, and so not being able to commit to jobs, careers, people, whatever, relationships. At first glance, that looks like you don't want to be tied down. It looks like you don't want to be held down by anything. But what I found interesting that they talked about in the book that I really resonated with, and that was actually kind of an emotional realization for me as I applied it to my own life, is that actually what's actually going on underneath the surface, underneath the tough exterior of a love avoidant who can sometimes to his partner seem like he has or she has no emotions, which I've gotten that feedback from people from romantic partners in the past, that like, why don't you seem to empathize with this, or how come you don't feel the same way, or whatever it might be, is that underneath that steely exterior, what's actually going on is a fear of abandonment. And not physical abandonment, because, you know, as a love avoidant, you're pushing people away who geographically want to be close to you, but emotional abandonment, because deep down, a love avoidant, and I realized this about myself, believes that if they let somebody in, if they let somebody come into their life, that person will do exactly what their parent did. And again, it's not necessarily about blaming anybody or anything. You know, like very few parents, if any, probably none on this earth are perfect. And trauma is a childhood trauma, which everybody has to some degree, is a two-way street. So it's partially what the parent did and partially what how the child perceives it. And really all that matters is how the child perceives it. And so there's no subjective like way to point fingers necessarily. It just is what it is. The best we can do is become aware of it as we grow up and be adults and try to stop those patterns in our family lineage when we have our own children. But what was I saying? So essentially, it's a fear. What the love avoidant is truly scared of, more than commitment, underneath that, they're actually scared of emotional abandonment, because they feel like if they let someone in the same way that they let their parental figures in who enmeshed them and controlled them, that feeling of being controlled is actually emotional neglect. Because when somebody is trying to impose all these rules and restrictions on you, it's basically them imposing their own worldview onto your experience and not giving you the space and not showing the interest in your own emotional experience to honor that you have a say in this, basically. So it's this emotional abandonment that happens to us when we're young, us love avoidants, that causes us to then fear more emotional abandonment. So it's really more so than a fear of commitment. It's a fear of truly being loved. And that was a really moving, powerful thing for me to realize as I was reading this book, and something that I'm going to meditate on more. So yeah, I just wanted to share that with you guys. And I don't know if anybody else can relate to anything that I talked about in this video. And I definitely am going to make more videos about this, because this is a super fascinating subject to me, and something that I think almost everybody on earth is dealing with to some degree or the other. And I also will end by saying, I don't think it's so binary that you're either one or the other. I definitely have aspects to my personality that also are love addicted in some ways, which are caused by, maybe perceiving some emotional neglect when I was younger. But overall, my behavior would definitely imply that I've been a love avoidant in most of my adult life in romantic relationships. And it's really fascinating to start to unpeel that and unpack why that is and how much of it has to do with how we were parented and raised. So with that, I'm going to leave you guys, and until next time, much love. Peace. Oh, and real quick side note for my amazing mom. I fucking love my mom. She's the greatest. She is the most caring person in my life and loves me more than anybody else. And also all of my musical and artistic and spiritual interests are definitely largely due to her. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. I think it's fascinating that this theory is so fascinating. And the coolest part about it is that it's totally blameless, because it's very easy to point your finger at your parents and say, oh, well, why didn't you do this? Or why did you do this? Or whatever. But ultimately, everybody's like shit that they're working through, like everybody's like things that they, personality quirks or whatever, are not theirs. It's all passed down from the way that they were parented and the way their parents were parented. And so that's the part that's so interesting to me, is that so much of our behaviors aren't really truly ours. We're just running a program that was installed into us by our parents and their parents. And I'm so fascinated and inspired by the process of getting conscious about that program and trying to investigate it and, upgrade it if we can. So much love, guys. See you tomorrow.